My name is Marcus Webb, and even now, months after my last shift in neurobiomechanics, the smell of industrial disinfectant and cold metal still clings to my clothes like it's soaked into my bloodstream. A reminder that I never should have taken the night watch job, no matter how good the pay looked on paper, no matter how badly I needed to replace the brakes on my truck and pay off the back rent on my apartment. The hiring process was too easy. That should have been my first red flag. I filled out a packet, watched a 30-minute training video that looked like it was made in the 90s. Then a man in a dark uniform who never introduced himself slid a badge across the table and said, "You start tonight." No handshake, no tour, no orientation. Just me, my black hoodie, my steel-toe boots, and a badge that unlocked every door except the ones that mattered. Harrow didn't operate like a normal research facility. It was buried 3 floors beneath an abandoned warehouse, and the only people I ever saw were the 2 watchmen on the shifts before and after mine, both men who spoke quietly, avoided eye contact, and walked like they hadn't slept properly in years. The older one, Cole, was the one who gave me the rules, speaking so flatly that it felt like he was reading from a script hardwired into his brain. Never approach tanks 10 through 15 during active hours. Never speak toward the glass. Never acknowledge speech coming from inside the tanks, even if it sounds familiar. If the glass fogs from the inside, activate code gray. If you hear someone knocking, you leave the hallway immediately. And whatever you do, if something calls your name, you did not hear it. Understand? I laughed at first, but Cole didn't. His eyes were hollow, like something had been scraped out of him long before I arrived. The first 4 nights were uneventful, just me making rounds, scanning keypads, logging temperature readouts, and trying not to think about how empty the place felt without scientists or technicians anywhere in sight. Just machines humming in the dark and the distant slosh of thick fluids inside sealed tanks. I tried peeking at a few of the lower-level consoles, but everything above level 2 clearance was locked behind access codes I didn't have. It wasn't until the 5th night that I finally heard Tank 12. I was halfway down the dim containment corridor, logging readings on my tablet, when the floor beneath my boots trembled like a power generator had kicked on somewhere deep below. Then, unmistakably, something tapped the inside of Tank 12's glass, slow, deliberate, like knuckles knocking on a door. I froze. Tanks 1 through 9 were uneventful, full of murky nutrient fluid and motionless organic shapes suspended like sleeping animals. But 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15 were in their own sealed wing behind reinforced glass panels and pressure-sensitive flooring. Tank 12 was the only one with its lights completely off, the only one with a warning plate bolted directly onto the floor beneath it. Speech-reactive entity. Do not engage. Do not respond. Do not approach during active HOURS. My pulse began pounding so hard it felt like heat inside my skull. The knocking came again, louder this time, followed by a long scrape that vibrated the entire metal frame. I tried calling Cole on the radio, but all I got was static. Then through the static, a voice whispered my full name, my exact voice, and I felt the air drain from my lungs as I staggered backward, nearly dropping the radio. The facility lights flickered overhead, and for a moment the glass on Tank 12 glowed faint blue from within, revealing the faint outline of something massive shifting in the suspension fluid, something with long limbs folding and unfolding like it was learning how to move them. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over a drain grate in the floor. I tried calling control, hitting the emergency line, but the console simply read, "Network blocked, active event." That was when the PA system crackled on with a sound like metal being torn, and a flat robotic voice I'd never heard before said, "Emergency alert. Containment breach, level red. All personnel remain in position. Do not respond to auditory contact." The doors at both ends of the hallway slammed shut automatically, locking with heavy bolts I could hear sliding into place from inside the walls. The temperature in the corridor dropped sharply, frost forming around the edges of the tank glass. Then the knocking came again, closer this time, deeper, heavier, and a faint shape pressed against the inside of the glass like a gigantic hand made of bone wrapped in stretched translucent skin. I should have run, but there was nowhere to run to, and my legs felt like they were full of wet cement. The air around Tank 12 vibrated with a low-frequency hum that made my teeth ache. Then the thing inside spoke again, not through the tank but through the ventilation system, using my own voice perfectly. "Marcus, come here." The sound of my own voice echoed down the metal ductwork, distorted and wrong, like a recording being played backward and forward at the same time. I backed away slowly, my breath fogging in front of me as the lights flickered harder, the shadows stretching unnaturally across the corridor. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment everything changed. The moment Harrow Biogenetics became more than a job, more than a paycheck. It became a cage I would never fully escape, even if I survived what came next. I don't know how long I stood frozen in that corridor listening to my stolen voice bleed through the ventilation ducts. But when the lights finally steadied, and the temperature rose just enough for my breath to fade, something in me snapped back into motion. Some primal instinct screaming at me to get away from Tank 12, before the thing inside finished, whatever it was doing to the internal structure of the glass. I spun toward the nearest emergency hatch, slamming my badge against the reader until it unlocked with a clunk that echoed through the hall like a gunshot. Then I pulled the heavy door open and practically threw myself into the stairwell, gripping the railing as the hatch slammed closed behind me with a metallic ring. The stairwell was narrow, concrete, lit with a sickly green emergency glow that made everything look like it was filmed through night vision. My boots clanged on the metal steps as I climbed, two at a time, desperate to get to the upper level where control might still have power. I reached for my radio again. "Cole, respond. Control, respond. This is Webb in Sector B. Tank 12 is..." Static tore across the speaker, and then something hissed in perfect cadence with my breathing. Not matching, mirroring. "Marcus, don't run." I nearly threw the radio down the stairs, but forced myself to keep it. It wasn't a communications tool anymore. It was a damn seismograph for whatever was stalking the facility. I killed the power switch, silencing it. The stairwell felt too quiet without the static, like the whole building was holding its breath. Halfway up the second flight, a deep metallic groan vibrated through the walls, the sound of something large pressing against reinforced glass or steel. Then a crack, sharp, loud, followed by the distant wail of a pressure alarm. Tank 12's containment barrier had ruptured. That meant the fluid level was dropping or the structural integrity was failing. I didn't know which was worse. At the top of the stairs, the landing opened into a long hallway lined with maintenance lockers and sealed research doors. The red emergency lights spun in slow circles, bathing the walls in pulsing crimson. My boots splashed into something when I stepped forward, and I jerked the flashlight on to see a trail of viscous blue fluid, the same suspension medium used in tanks 10 through 15, leading across the floor and disappearing beneath the door to Lab C. My stomach twisted. That fluid should never be outside the tanks. Ever. I approached slowly, trying not to breathe too loudly. The door wasn't fully shut. It hung slightly off its track, like something had pushed it open from the inside with enough force to bend the hinges. A cold draft slipped through the gap, carrying a faint metallic smell like old coins or blood diluted in water. I pressed my ear against the metal. Something faint moved inside. Wet. Dragging. A slithering of dense weight shifting across tile. For a moment I considered just running back down the stairs and locking myself inside the supply closet until the military arrived, but then a voice drifted through the gap. Not mine this time. Cole S. "Marcus, I need help." My breath caught in my throat. That son of a bitch had been missing radio contact for the last 20 minutes, ever since Tank 12 cracked. I prayed he'd somehow made it to Lab C, but the voice, the tone was off. The cadence wrong. It sounded like Cole, but hollowed out, like someone had pulled the emotion from his words and left the empty casing behind. I pushed the door open an inch. The room beyond was dark except for a flickering overhead lamp. I swept my flashlight across the floor. Blue fluid smeared everywhere in long streaks as if something had crawled through it. The beam passed over broken glass, overturned chairs, then finally landed on a human figure slumped against the far wall, a man in a security jacket. Cole. Or what was left of him. His chest was torn open, not like an animal attack, not random, clean, deliberate cuts, surgical but wrong. His face was pale but intact, mouth slightly open, eyes unfocused. But the moment my light landed on him, his head snapped upward with a sickening jerk, spine bending too far back, and his voice, perfectly calm, said, "Marcus, don't be afraid." My blood went cold. His jaw wasn't moving. The sound wasn't coming from him. It was coming from the vent above him. A low scrape echoed overhead, something pulling itself through the ductwork with too many limbs, wet and suctioning, moving with deliberate cadence. Then I heard breathing, my breathing, except it wasn't mine. It was copying the pattern of my fear, the rhythm of my panic, feeding off it like oxygen. I stepped back slowly, keeping my flashlight trained on the vent as the metal grill bulged outward, the screws bending under pressure. A pale, elongated hand pressed through the slits, fingers too long, joints bending in the opposite direction. And then in my voice again, "Marcus, come see me." I turned and ran so hard I nearly slipped in the fluid. I slammed the stairwell door shut and bolted up the steps toward control on the next level. My lungs burned. Shadows seemed to move against the walls, bending with the emergency lights. Every few seconds I heard my footsteps echo, but one set was just slightly out of sync, trailing behind by half a beat. I burst into the control center, hoping for people, backup, anything. But the room was empty, chairs spinning slightly as though someone had left seconds before I arrived. The consoles were still powered. I jumped to the main terminal and activated a lockdown sequence, but instead of engaging, the screen filled with red text. "Containment priority override Specimen 12 active." The intercom crackled for the third time, and this time I didn't just hear my own voice. I heard two of them, overlapping. One lower, one higher, both perfectly synchronized except for one word. "Marcus, don't run." My hand hovered over the lockdown switch. I knew then that Tank 12 was no longer just waking up. It was hunting, and it was learning me faster than I could escape. I didn't have time to think, barely had time to breathe, as the overlapping versions of my own voice whispered through every speaker in the control center, almost harmonizing with each other in a tone that felt less like speech and more like a biological sonar ping, testing, searching, triangulating me inside the room. The red emergency lights washed across the consoles in violent pulses, turning every surface into some pulsing artery of the building's dying circulatory system. I forced myself to focus on the screens, scrolling through locked menus until I found a folder marked Project ECHOFRAME, level black only, and although my badge shouldn't have granted access, the system flickered like something on the network side had already compromised the authentication protocols, and the screen simply opened as if it wanted me to read what was inside. The first document was a short orientation file titled Specimen 12, Acoustic Mimetic Entity, and as I skimmed the text, dread tightened around my throat like a fist made of ice. According to the file, Tank 12's occupant wasn't originally grown here. It had been recovered from an abandoned military testing facility in Nevada, where the original research team had attempted to engineer a biological intelligence capable of reproducing human speech patterns for infiltration purposes. But they didn't fully understand what they'd created. The entity didn't just mimic sound, it consumed it, absorbed it, metabolized it, used it as structural fuel to generate new biological mass. Words weren't just communication, they were nutrition. When researchers had spoken near the tank, it had memorized their voices instantly, constructing incomplete replicas of their cadences inside its amorphous internal tissue. But when one scientist whispered his own name, something inside the tank had changed. The entity didn't just mimic him, it began forming an anatomical copy. It didn't get far. Security protocols triggered containment gas, but it was enough for the government to take over the project, relocating the thing to Harrow, where I now stood reading a list of warnings that should have been tattooed on my hands before they ever let me walk these halls. The file contained another section labeled Personnel Incident, Tank 12 Behavioral Shift, and against every instinct screaming to close the terminal and hide, I opened it. The first line hit me like a punch to the chest. Following exposure to repeated speech patterns, Specimen 12 attempts physical replication of the nearest human male. Replication begins with laryngeal imprinting and moves outward toward skeletal structuring. If replication completes, original subject is no longer required. The words sank into my mind like weighted hooks. It wasn't just copying my voice, it was building me. Somewhere in the walls, the ducts groaned under stress, and something heavy scuttled from one vent to another, claws scraping metal in a pattern disturbingly similar to the clicking rhythm of keystrokes. I backed away from the console just as a second file opened on its own, the cursor moving across the screen like invisible fingers were guiding it. A video feed popped up, grainy, infrared, labeled SUBLEVEL3 tunnel access. The image jolted my stomach into my boots. I saw myself standing in the hallway. Same black hoodie, same jeans, same boots, same posture, same height. Except I wasn't standing there, I was in control. The copy tilted its head toward the camera, and its face rippled. Not skin, not flesh, but a flexible membrane that hadn't decided what shape it wanted to imitate yet. Then it smiled, and the smile stretched too wide, jaw lengthening as though someone had taken a digital model of a human head and pushed the vertices past their natural limits. The thing raised a hand not quite right, fingers slightly fused, lengths uneven, and lifted one finger to its lips in a SHH gesture, though its lips weren't fully formed, just the suggestion of them. And then it spoke. In my voice. Found you. Every console speaker in the room echoed the same word, some lower, some higher, some doubled, all converging into a chorus that rattled the light fixtures. I spun toward the door just as the metal bulged inward, a dent forming from the other side as something slammed against it with the weight of a charging animal. The hinges groaned, screws popping from the frame. I grabbed a steel maintenance bar from beneath the console and backed into the corner, heart beating so violently it felt like it was trying to punch its way out of my chest. Another slam. The upper hinge tore free, sparks spitting from the torn wiring. Then something slid through the crack, an arm-like limb, long and thin, wet with blue suspension fluid, joints bending too many ways as it groped along the wall like a blind insect searching for heat. I made the split-second decision that staying in control would get me killed. I sprinted toward the far emergency hatch, nearly slipping on the smooth floor, and shoved my badge against the reader. The hatch unlocked with a harsh buzz. I threw it open and ducked into the maintenance tunnel just as the control center door tore completely off its frame behind me and crashed to the floor. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for me to squeeze through sideways, lined with cables, pipes, and grated flooring that rattled under my weight. I killed my flashlight and crawled forward using the faint red pulses of emergency lights leaking through the gaps in the metal above. Behind me, something entered the tunnel with a low, wet dragging sound, accompanied by soft echoes of my own voice whispering, "Marcus, come back." But the words were getting better, sharper, clearer, more emotionally accurate. It was learning faster now. I kept crawling, ignoring the metal gouging into my knees and palms until the tunnel forked. I chose the left at random and pulled myself into a service junction filled with humming electrical boxes. As I caught my breath, the vents above me let out a metallic vibration. The entity was still searching, still crawling through the ductwork. And then, God help me, I heard something new, a second version of my voice, not copying my fear this time, copying my calm. "Marcus," it said quietly, "don't run. We can finish this together." I didn't understand what that meant yet, but I was about to. I don't know how long I stayed crouched in that maintenance junction listening to my own voice echo through the vents in different moods. Frantic calm. Mocking. Like the thing was cycling through my memories of how I sounded in every situation and trying them on. But eventually the terror sharpened into something else. A thin, hard line of anger that cut through the fog in my brain and let me think again. Even if thinking meant staring at the electrical boxes and realizing that as long as the system stayed up, the entity would have a highway of wires and speakers and sensors to crawl through. The ECHOFRAME files had called it an acoustic mimetic intelligence, but underneath all the jargon I understood one simple truth: it lived in sound. It fed on words. It was using the lab's infrastructure like an exoskeleton. If I couldn't kill it, and I doubted anything in this building I could at least try to cut off its access to the lattice it was riding. That meant two things. I had to get to the main power distribution array, and I had to reach the emergency broadcast console that tied Tank 12 to the external alert system. The project notes in Control had mentioned a phrase set, counter-resonance patterns tested but never deployed, that seemed to trigger withdrawal responses in earlier iterations of the entity. They'd buried that inside ECHOFRAME as a behavioral governor, something only greenlit for theoretical use. But the way the system had opened for me, the way those files had practically shoved themselves into my eyes, I had the sixth sense some part of this infrastructure wanted me to find them, like I was being shepherded toward a choice someone much higher up the chain had predicted years ago. I slid the maintenance panel off the nearest electrical box, hands shaking just enough to make the screws rattle as they hit the grate. The inside was a jungle of cables, breakers, and labeled lines. A laminated diagram was taped to the inside of the door, probably left by some bored tech with better handwriting than mine. Main grid feed, critical SYSTEMS loop, containment ring, lab support, local AUX. I traced the line labeled containment ring with my finger. It looped down toward sectors B and C, the tank floor and surrounding labs, then fed into a smaller box marked acoustic array. I couldn't see Tank 12 from here, but I pictured it in my head. Glass cracked, fluid leaking, something half-formed pulling itself up by sound alone. "Marcus," my voice whispered through the vent above me in a tone of forced concern, "you're making a mistake." Another version of my voice overlapped it, this one flat, clinical, like I was reading an incident report. Subject Marcus Webb displays maladaptive response to acoustic stimuli, attempts sabotage of containment infrastructure, potential vector for secondary breach. The damn thing had memorized my own internal monologue styles, the way my thoughts split between emotion and analysis. I forced my breathing to slow and yanked the main lever feeding the acoustic array. Sparks jumped, the lights flickered, and a deep hum that I hadn't consciously noticed until it stopped cut off mid-vibration, leaving the air dead and heavy, like someone had removed the background music from reality. The voices in the vents went silent, not just quiet, absent. For 3 long seconds the only sound in the junction was my heartbeat and the distant drip of leaked fluid somewhere downpipe. Then a new noise slid through the walls. Not words, but a low, grinding rumble like something big was adjusting its weight against metal. I'd heard it, or at least pissed it off. Good. That meant it could be pushed. I jammed the panel back into place and crawled toward the far end of the junction where a rusted ladder climbed up toward a service hatch. According to the small, filthy stencil above it, this led to comm/alert. Exactly what I needed. I climbed, every rung slick with condensation, listening for movement in the shaft. Halfway up, metal above me popped inward with a loud bang, dust raining down on my face. Something had slammed into the duct that shared this vertical space. I clung to the ladder and held still. A series of sharp taps moved up the duct, like fingers drumming on sheet metal, mapping my position. Then it stopped, and from somewhere very close my voice whispered, "There you are." The difference now was that it sounded amused. I climbed faster. At the top, the service hatch stuck for a second, then gave way with a scraping noise that made my teeth hurt. I hauled myself into a low, cramped ceiling crawlspace lit by a single bare bulb. A few meters ahead, a panel hung open, revealing the back of the emergency alert console room. The same place where, on quiet nights, I'd watch training staff send test tones across the network to make sure the system could tell a whole valley to shelter in place if some chemical truck rolled over on the highway. Now that console was my only way to shove something back along those lines. I slid forward until I could peer through the panel gap into the room. It was empty. The main monitor glowed with a standby status, lines of text rolling by. Node, HARBIO07. Status, degraded. Lattice link, live. A small dialogue box blinked at the bottom. COUNTRPHRESE Suite, Alpha/Beta/Gamma restricted. I popped the panel fully and dropped into the room, landing harder than I meant to, knees jolting. As soon as my boots hit the floor, three things happened at once. The overhead lights shifted from red to a nauseous yellow, the speakers crackled with a half-formed word, and the emergency door behind me sealed shut with a heavy clunk. I was locked in. "Marcus," my voice said over the console speakers, sounding strained around the edges, "you're not thinking big enough. They built ECHOFRAME for us, not for you. You're just a gauge." I ignored it and sat at the console, fingers flying over the keys. The counterphrase interface required a level black token. The system, kindly, had cached one in memory after the earlier command override, probably never expecting a lowly night watchman to come poking around in here. I grabbed it, slammed it into the authorization prompt, and the restricted menu unfolded like a throat opening. Alpha, Beta, Gamma. The sets were labeled not by what they did, but by how much they hurt the entity in testing. Alpha, partial recoil, moderate distress, low stability risk. Beta, severe recoil, high distress, possible structural degradation of containment. Gamma, unknown ceiling, full withdrawal in all observed cases, high system risk. I didn't have time to weigh ethics against survival. I selected Gamma. A warning flashed. COUNTRPHRESE Gamma may cause permanent lattice damage. Confirm. Behind the warning, through the one narrow wired glass slit in the console room door, I saw motion in the hallway, a shadow stretching upward, taller than any man, leaning closer to the glass. My own face bloomed out of the dark for a second, featureless at first, then assembling details. Eyes, nose, mouth like polygons harassing into place. It grinned at me, too wide, too thin. In my exact voice, echoed by half a dozen lesser copies, it said, "You're only hurting yourself, Marcus. I am you." My hand shook, but I hit confirm. The console asked for one more thing. Select carrier voice for counterphrase broadcast. Two options, synthetic or local. I understood immediately. It didn't just react to the words. It reacted to who said them. A synthetic voice might sting. A voice it had invested in, built itself around, might feel like getting skinned alive. I chose local and accepted. The console lights dimmed and a new prompt appeared. When ready, speak COUNTRPHRESE Gamma into mic. Max duration 7.5 seconds. The mic arm in front of me looked suddenly like a gun. Outside the glass, my almost face pressed closer, skin rippling, as if it could hear choices in the faint hum of the circuitry. "Don't," it said, my fear voice, my pleading voice, the one I'd used once begging a landlord for another week's grace. "We can leave here together. You hate them, I remember. All those nights you cursed the people above you. Let me out and I'll take all of them apart, one by one. You just have to open one door." The worst part was it wasn't lying about what I'd said or felt. But something inside me that was still me, still separate, grabbed onto the rule that had been hammered into my skull from the first night. Don't answer. Don't negotiate. Don't believe anything that sounds like you if it's not coming from your own chest. I pulled the mic close enough to feel the cold metal against my lip, took the deepest breath I could manage, and spoke the ugliest sequence of syllables I've ever heard in my life. A string of harsh, back-of-the-throat sounds, the file labeled only as COUNTRPHRESE Gamma 3. The system captured my voice and threw it back into the lattice at maximum amplitude. And the lab, the entity, and whatever was listening 3 floors down all screamed at once. The scream that tore through the lab wasn't mine, at least not entirely. It was layered, like the building itself was vocalizing, 1,000 overlapping versions of my own voice shattering into raw static. The floor vibrated under my boots, the ceiling panels rattling as if something huge were dragging itself across the ductwork. The lights strobed violently, flipping between dead black and sickly yellow, and the air turned sharp, metallic, like breathing lightning. The creature outside the window, my almost face, jerked backward as though something had slammed into it. Its features split and warped. My eyes bulged outward, my mouth widened until it was just a gash across its skull, and the skin rippled like boiling tar. Then it convulsed, violently, slamming its head and shoulders into the hallway wall hard enough to dent the metal. The console spat warnings, lattice instability, 87% counterphrase gamma approaching critical resonance cease broadcast OR system failure imminent, but I didn't stop. I couldn't, because I could hear it weakening. The voices in the vents, the mimicry, the perfect control, it all fractured into glitching broken echoes. Mark RRS Mark stop stow stop. The thing slammed both hands against the glass slit, and the impact spiderwebbed the reinforced pane. A second blow made the cracks deepen, forming branching white lines across the window. A third hit dented the steel frame itself. One more and it would break through. COUNTRPHRSC Gamma 6.9 seconds, the console announced. The scream in the hallway pitched upward, distorting into an ultrasonic wail that made my teeth ache. It wasn't mimicking me anymore. It wasn't mimicking anything. It was just noise, raw, furious, and wounded. Then the glass gave out. With a sound like a gunshot, the reinforced slit exploded inward, shards spraying across the console room. A black, seething shape spilled through the opening, not quite a body, not quite a shadow. More like a mass of vibrating threads, each one pulsing with tiny, stuttering versions of my voice. The thing didn't walk, it dragged itself, leaving streaks on the metal that hissed like acid. It lunged at me. The console lights flared white. COUNTRPHRASE complete. Broadcast terminated. The room went silent. The entity froze mid-movement. Its many knot feet skidded across the floor as though it had suddenly forgotten how gravity worked. Then, in a slow, sickening motion, it folded inward like a collapsing tent. The threads cinched together, knotting, twisting, shriveling into a single dark bundle the size of a fist. A sound like air being sucked out of the world followed, then nothing. No movement, no voices, no hum in the walls, no presence. The creature, the thing that had worn me like a favorite coat, was gone. I stayed crouched behind the console for a full minute before I dared move, waiting for some leftover nerve twitch or aftershock. None came. The air felt heavy, dead, like the space left behind when a storm has stripped a landscape bare. Finally I stood, legs trembling. The hallway outside was scorched in irregular patterns, as though invisible lightning had danced across it. The dented metal bore marks from the thing's hands, but the shadow it had cast was gone. No residue, no smoke, no slime, nothing. Tank 12 was silent, the whole building was silent. For the first time since I'd taken this cursed job, the lab felt smaller. Not because anything had changed on blueprints, but because something enormous had been removed, leaving a hollow somehow worse than its presence. I stumbled down past Sector C toward the tank floor. The emergency door had unsealed at some point, maybe automatically, maybe because the entity no longer held any influence over the infrastructure. Tank 12 stood open, cracked glass edges dripping with the last of the blue nutrient fluid. The thick restraints lay coiled on the ground like shed snakeskin, and in the center where the creature had emerged, there was nothing, not even footprints, only a single wet streak across the floor, ending at the vent that fed into the acoustic array. The same vent system I'd crawled through. The same one it had used to spread, but it wasn't spreading now. The silence was absolute. I walked the perimeter in case I'd missed something, some lump of matter, some strange residue. Nothing. Tank 12 was just an empty coffin. Sector B was the same. Abandoned equipment, overturned carts, fractured panels. Sector A, control room, dead screens. Sector D, the living quarters, dark. Sector E, surveillance, offline. It wasn't until I circled back to the main atrium that I realized something else. The red emergency lights were gone. In their place, the normal white ceiling lights glowed steadily, no flicker, no glitching. The building had reset itself like a traumatized animal finally unclenching. I stepped outside. The night air was cool, still humid with that electric scent from when everything had begun, but the world outside the lab was untouched. The perimeter lights were steady. The desert was quiet. No alarms. No movement at the fence. For a second I let myself believe it, that it was over. Then my radio crackled, a soft, static-ridden click, then another. Then my own voice whispered through the speaker, "Marcus, don't go." I dropped it like it had burned me, heart slamming against my ribs. The voice came again, closer now, echoing faintly from the perimeter speakers mounted on the floodlight towers. "Marcus, stay, we're not done." I backed toward the building. The perimeter lights flickered once, twice. Then from the darkness beyond the fence, maybe 30 meters into the desert, I heard something step onto the gravel, slow, deliberate, wrong, and then a second step, a third, and a soft, amused whisper, counterphrase gamma hurts, but I learned from it. Every light in the facility died at once. The night went pitch black, something big moved in the dark just beyond where the floodlights had been. Then my own voice whispered right behind my ear. Round 2.